what's up? A lot of people ask me in the comments whether or not they should get a stand mixer. My short answer to that question is yes. If cooking is a serious hobby for you and you enjoy making a wide variety of fun recipes, then yes, you should definitely get one. But this video is not about whether or not you should buy a stand mixer. It's whether or not you should spend real money to get a nice one. In my opinion, a nice one would be a KitchenAid. It's the gold standard for home cooks, and it's known for its power, versatility, and durability, and it costs anywhere from $350 to $750 US. That's a lot of money. Today, I'm gonna be taking the KitchenAid stand mixer and putting it up against one of the cheapest mixers available on Amazon that still has good reviews. To find it, Lauren spent an entire workday researching all of the different mixers available to find the one that she deemed to be the best under $100. I'll be looking at the specs and features of each mixer, and I'm gonna be mixing a bunch of different recipes to see how they stack up against each other. One of which is a real doozy, and I will be very surprised if the budget mixer makes it through. But before we talk about specs and features, let's talk about the cost. The KitchenAid model that I have costs $350 US, while the budget mixer that we're looking at today by Hamilton Beach is just a quarter of that cost at around $85 US. If you just look at these mixers side by side, you can see that they're not that different, but when you get under the hood, there are a few things that really set them apart. First off is the weight and materials. The KitchenAid body and attachments are all made of metal and generally feel quite sturdy. The whole mixer weighs in at around 22 pounds, whereas the Hamilton Beach is just over 10 pounds and has a much cheaper feeling plastic body and mostly plastic parts, like here on the base of the bowl and on the base of the whisk attachment. The other two attachments that come with the Hamilton Beach, the dough hook and the beater, are fully made of metal. And while they're a little bit lighter than the KitchenAids, I'd say they feel fairly comparable. I'm interested to see how they stand up against some of these harder mixes. Attachments for both models connect to the body in the same way with an easy push and twist, and both seem to be pretty well attached. I've used high and low end mixers in the past that don't have such a good grip on the attachments, and mixing at high speeds feels a little bit scary. The KitchenAid bowl is 5 quarts, while the Hamilton Beach is 4. Lauren found it pretty challenging to find larger bowl sizes for any of the well-reviewed cheaper mixers, so the smaller bowl seems like it's going to be a compromise if you're looking to spend less. Now, to get under the hood, this KitchenAid has 10 mixing speeds with a 325 watt motor, while the Hamilton Beach has 7 speeds with a 300 watt motor. The number of watts basically just means how well the motor can do strenuous tasks. Overall, these two mixers are pretty close, and the comparison should be fair. Speaking of comparison, I'm going to put both mixers through 4 mixes of increasingly higher demand. The hardest mix has really pushed my KitchenAid to its limit in the past, so I'm curious to see if the HB can hang. So the first test is going to be making whipped cream. This one is simple and easy on the motor, but it's something that I find myself using my mixer for pretty often. And I think it stands in as a good proxy for other stand mixery things like whipping egg whites, making frosting, or bringing together a loose cake batter. The setup for this test and all of the tests will be very simple. Same recipe, same speed, and same attachment. For this test, I took 1 pint of heavy whipping cream and spun it on high speed in each mixer until it was whipped up into stiff peaks. The budget mixer came up to speed no problem and didn't seem to be under any strain during the whole process. Granted, 1 pint of cream is not a lot of weight to throw around, but running gracefully at high speed with no issue for like 3 to 4 minutes feels like a win. And as you can see, it can whip cream no problem. Textbook stiff peaks. The implication here is that this mixer motor should have no problem performing tasks that are low lift, high speed. I did the same test in my KitchenAid, and to no surprise, it is capable of making whipped cream. But one major difference here is the upper end of speed. The high speed on the KitchenAid is 20 to 30% faster than the Hamilton Beach. It's not that I recommend making whipped cream on speed 10, it's just something to note if making things as fast as possible is important to you. The KitchenAid took about 1 minute to reach stiff peaks, and the Hamilton Beach took about 3.5 minutes. Side by side, you can see the results are pretty much identical, and after the first test here, I'm feeling pretty optimistic about this budget mixer. Now, to help quantify the performance here, I'm going to give each mixer a score between 1 and 10. So, whipped cream test, Hamilton Beach, 10 out of 10. KitchenAid, also 10 out of 10. The next test is a big one. Chocolate chip cookies. This recipe tests the mixer's capacity to run under medium load for an extended period of time at medium to high speed. Plus, it's probably one of the most common uses for a stand mixer. The recipe that I'm using is mine from this channel, and I think it's real good. Link to the video below if you want to learn how to make it. I started with 2 sticks of softened butter and the white and brown sugars, threw the paddle attachment on, and then spun this on medium-high speed until the butter and sugar were whipped up into something that looks kind of like cake frosting. Now, a few things that I noticed while using the budget mixer. Number 1, the paddle attachment doesn't fit in the bowl nearly as snugly as the KitchenAid one does, and so things tend to get stuck on the sides because the paddle can't reach them. That requires you to stop what you're doing pretty frequently and scrape down the side so that the cookie dough can get back within the grasp of that paddle. The second thing that I noticed was that overall it took quite a bit longer to whip air into this butter sugar with the cheaper mixer than it did with the KitchenAid, like double the time. The KitchenAid took 5 to 6 minutes to reach that fluffy stage, while the Ham Beach mixer took closer to 14 minutes. That added mix time also added more overall friction, and that heated up the butter, making it really hard for it to hold on to air. Once the butter and sugar were creamed up, it was time to add in the wet ingredients. The budget mixer had no problem with that, with the exception of a couple of scrape downs as we went, unlike the KitchenAid, which didn't need a scrape down. Everything just was gripped by the paddle. And then lastly, the dry ingredients go in, and then a slow speed churn to get everything combined while developing as little gluten as possible. The only thing that I noticed here was that once things got heavy, the budget mixer's motor did strain a little bit on every revolution. It didn't seem like it was going to give up, but it did seem pretty labored. The KitchenAid's motor almost never sounds this way, unless I'm really pushing it and doing something stupid. Overall, both mixers completed the task, although the cheaper mixer took longer in the creaming step and it heated things up, and that stunted the amount of air that we were able to trap. Side by side, you can really see the difference in the creamedness between the KitchenAid and then the Hamilton Beach. But after they were baked, there really wasn't a noticeable difference in how they tasted. The cookies made with the Hamilton Beach mixer spread slightly more in the oven, and I think that's due to the butter being warmer while creaming. Either way, this is an A+ chocolate chip cookie with amazing flavor and texture. Both versions are well within 5% of my ideal here, and you wouldn't know that this one on the right was made with a mixer that's under $100. So, results for the chocolate chip cookie test? I'll give the budget mixer an 8 out of 10. It took longer and had some trouble whipping in as much air as I'd like. The KitchenAid gets a 10 out of 10 because it's a workhorse and it made these cookies as good as any commercial mixer that I've used in a bakery. Now, for this next test, we're really going to up the ante in terms of load put on the mixer, and things are going to get a little spicy. Kind of like this red pepper queso chicken from the sponsor of this video, Factor. I think most people who have jobs and stuff to do don't want to cook and do dishes all the time. That's where Factor's fresh, never frozen meals come in. They're delivered right to your door and they're ready in 2 minutes so that you can get back to enjoying the nice weather or doing any other activities that you like that aren't doing dishes. As someone who spends long days filming, I tend to grab a Factor as a quick lunch when I don't have time for a real break. Or on days where I've been making and cleaning up messes in the kitchen all day and I just don't want to do any more dishes. This week, I went for the Calorie Smart box, but Factor's meal plans support a ton of other lifestyle and wellness goals. Their Protein Plus meals have 30 grams of protein or more per serving, and they also have vegetarian or vegan options. So to get some good tasting food that you don't have to cook or clean up after, head to factor75.com or click the link in my description and use code Lagerstrom50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. Again, that's Lagerstrom50 at factor75.com for 50% off. For the next test, I'm going to make some pizza dough, the thing that I used my KitchenAid stand mixer for more than anything else. The recipe that I chose was for a standard medium hydration dough that you would use to make a hand-tossed style of pizza. It's inspired or very similar to the one that I used in my white pizza video last year. Anyways, this Hamilton Beach model states clearly on the mixer itself that you shouldn't make more than 750 grams of dough at a time, and it recommends only using the dough hook on speed 1. So that's where I started, and it became pretty clear quickly that this was not going to work for 2 reasons. One, same as with the paddle attachment before, the dough hook sits with a gap between itself and the bowl and just can't grip the dough properly, especially when there's such a little amount of product in the bowl. And number 2, speed 1 is ridiculously slow, and mixing this dough recipe at that speed would take an hour, if it happened at all. So I doubled the batch size and tried to mix about 1.5 kilos worth of dough, or just over 3 pounds. I also upped the speed to something closer to medium high, which on the Hamilton Beach is about 3.5. It approximates the higher speed that I use on the KitchenAid to mix almost every dough on this channel, which is actually only 4 of 10, by the way. KitchenAid also states that you shouldn't use their mixer on yeasted doughs with the dough hook at speeds higher than 2, but I think that's stupid for the same reason as before. I always mix on 4 of 10, and I've been doing it for like 11 years with this mixer, so that's what I recommend. I would say model my behavior at your own risk though. So first up, even with this larger batch size and higher speed, I had a very hard time getting the dough hook on the cheaper mixer to grab the dough. It just kind of pushed it out to the edge and then gently massaged it without ever really gripping it or kneading it. I tried to scrape the dough down a few times to get it more involved with the dough hook, but it just couldn't make progress. Eventually, after about 12 to 14 minutes of mixing, I finally got the hook to grab enough dough so that it was able to bring everything together. But I couldn't get it to clear the bowl like I normally would in my KitchenAid. Even after 16 minutes of mix time, this dough was still quite shaggy and tore when I tried to give it the tug test. I knew all hope wasn't lost though. I could still turn this into something usable. So I flipped this dough out onto my cutting board and kneaded it by hand for about 3 minutes. Kneading it gave me a dough that would resemble the result that I'm looking for in the KitchenAid. It just took me a while to get there, and I had to not use the mixer for the last part, which kind of stinks. Unsurprisingly though, the KitchenAid didn't have any trouble bringing this dough together. And after about 8 minutes of mix time, it was fully developed and ready to ferment. See how it doesn't tear or shear when I tug it? That's a rough barometer that I use to determine gluten formation, and it means that this dough is mixed enough. But since this first recipe had a medium level of hydration and used a weaker flour, AP instead of bread, I decided to give the Hamilton Beach an easier second attempt. So I mixed the second batch of pizza dough with bread flour and less water, knowing that it would ball up much quicker and would be much easier for this mixer to knead. And sure enough, after 3 to 4 minutes, the dough came together and was being mixed properly. The downside here is that aesthetically, a low hydration 100% bread flour pizza dough is not usually what I want. This dough is going to make a pizza that's chewier, denser, and lacks the crisp, open, hold breadiness that you get from a wetter dough. So it's kind of a compromise. For the final comparison, I baked the slightly wetter AP flour-based dough that we ended up kneading by hand next to the KitchenAid one. And as you can see, that pizza ended up giving us a totally passable pizza crust. Here's the KitchenAid version for comparison. They're just about the same. And if you only made drier dough with stronger flour, I would say you could totally get away with this mixer for pizza dough, but for sure you can't just use any recipe that you find on the internet without some level of modification. Surprisingly though, this motor didn't seem overly stressed during these longer, higher load mixes, but the bowl hook combo definitely fell short. That could just be a shortcoming of this model and not something that pervades all budget mixers, but it's still less good than the KitchenAid, which doesn't have that problem. For the pizza dough, the Hamilton Beach gets 5 out of 10 and the KitchenAid gets 10 out of 10. No complaints with that one. Now, lastly, I wanted to make something that I knew even my KitchenAid would have trouble with. That's a French high butter brioche. This dough is super challenging to get right at home because it's close to 40% butter, but it's pretty special when done right, and it's something that you can really only get in France or a handful of other specialty bakeries in the world's biggest cities like LA, New York, or Tokyo. So to get started, I mixed the flour, water, salt, yeast, sugar, and eggs until a dry dough was formed. Again, the Hamilton Beach required a few scrape downs to get there. And once the dough was kneading around the bowl, I added in all of my softened butter. From there, it's just a long mix on medium-high speed to get the butter fully incorporated. Fat inhibits gluten formation, so to build a dough that has enough strength to hold up all that butter takes a very long time. Like 4 times longer than a lean dough without all that fat. This is the KitchenAid dough after 22 minutes. It's fully brought together and finally strengthened enough to hold itself up, but it's still pretty weak compared to all the other doughs that I make on this channel. Surprisingly, the budget mixer was also able to bring this dough together after a very long mix. At around the 22-minute mark, it started to clear the bowl, but it was still very weak at that point. So I kept on mixing until I got something that could hold itself together. Here's the issue though. Remember how that cookie dough got warm because of that extended mix time? Well, the same thing happened here. As time went on, the dough heated up and the heat actually degraded the flour's ability to develop gluten. Like it gets weaker as it heats up. Around 30 minutes, I was not really getting anywhere, so I decided to add some more flour to dry things out and to bring a little bit more strength, and then I kept on mixing. And after 34 minutes of mix time, I called it quits. As you can see, with some added flour and over a half hour, this did come together into a tuggable brioche. I'm honestly shocked that this mixer could go that hard for that long without breaking down. I mean, it did start to smell a little bit like an electrical fire towards the end, but only a little bit. Now, let's compare the proofed loaves. After the same amount of proof time, you can see that the Hamilton Beach version trapped less gas and rose less. That's because of the hot mix and its inhibited gluten. After the bake, you can see a very similar result. The KitchenAid on the left sprung up nicely, and the Hamilton Beach on the right did not. Overall, the Hamilton Beach did make brioche that you could eat like a dessert or a French toast, but again, like the pizza dough, it took some modification to make it happen, and a very long mix time. I'll give this mixer a 4 out of 10 for this brioche test, but honestly, I'm surprised it didn't break. Bonus point for that, 5 out of 10. KitchenAid, that's gonna be a 7 out of 10. This one also took a lot of time and didn't get it perfectly right. I really pushed this mixer to its upper limit. In practice though, making a 40% brioche at home is not really that great of an idea, and it's not the reason most people want a stand mixer. So let's review. The Hamilton Beach 4-quart mixer scored a 28 out of 40 and the KitchenAid a 37 out of 40. These scores are of course arbitrary at best, but these tests prove that the KitchenAid stand mixer is a powerful, versatile tool that performs well at pretty much any task you throw at it. In all honesty though, this cheaper mixer performed a lot better than I expected. I told Lauren explicitly before this how I thought that it would break or start smoking, especially when I threw the brioche at it, but it just kept on mixing. That's probably because the difference in power between the two isn't large. Again, that's 300 versus 325 watts. But the difference in build quality, the functional design, and the practical performance are noticeably different. But the question still remains, do you need to spend a lot of money to get a high quality stand mixer? And I think the answer to that is no. With caveats, of course. I bought this Hamilton Beach mixer for $88 US, and it did mix all the stuff that I needed it to. I'm confident that 90% of the tasks that people need it to do will work out. Now for the caveats though. Number one is durability. I have no idea how long this Hamilton Beach mixer is gonna last, or any of its cheap competitors, and that's because most of the cheap things that I've bought don't stand the test of time, and I've either had to replace them or upgrade, or just not have that thing anymore. But yeah, build quality is definitely a concern here because this is made of all plastic and I drop stuff a lot. I also think it's safe to assume though that if you're using this mixer to mix high yield doughs several times per month, then over time you're gonna run into the danger of pushing it a little bit too far. Who knows though, this mixer might last for many years, but it's unknown and seems unlikely. One thing I can say for certain though is that this KitchenAid mixer shows up for work every time you need it, and it can take some serious abuse. I've had this one for 12 years now, and I've mixed every recipe on this channel with it, all the bread, all the pizza I've ever made, and I even had it at the bread bakery that I worked at as a little aux mixer, and it's really been put through the ringer, and it just shows no sign of stopping. It's made of metal, all the parts are metal, and aside from having to replace the bowl once, I've had no problems. If this mixer died today, I would go out and buy another one immediately. Caveat 2 is a big one, and it's that this Hamilton Beach mixer does not have an accessory system. See this hole in the front of my KitchenAid? That's a port that allows you to utilize the internal motor to power a huge number of cooking tools that traditionally have not been accessible to the home cook. Some of my favorites are the meat grinder, the pasta extruder, and the pasta roller. Are these attachments expensive and not very practical? Yes, but so are golf clubs and jet skis. These things are made for hobbyists, and making pasta from scratch is fun and tastes good. Buying a KitchenAid opens you up to a huge number of future food projects, and buying a cheaper mixer means that you don't get to do those. For me personally, since I love to cook and have a decent amount of disposable income, spending the $350 plus the money for the accessories is money well spent. I'll go ahead and guess that some of you guys watching this video also have some disposable income and will be spending that money regardless, whether it's on a new car payment or 10 to 15 Chipotle bowls that you don't need. So if that's the case, a KitchenAid is also a no-brainer. But if you're looking for something cheaper that still does 90% of what the more expensive thing does, then this Hamilton Beach mixer is a great option for you and you'll have fun with it. What's your stance on stand mixers, you guys? Do you have one? Would you buy the cheaper one or splurge on the KitchenAid? Let me know down in the comments below, and I'll also link to both mixers down there if you want to compare them for yourself. As always, thank you so much for your time and attention. Thank you for sticking around to the end of the video, and we'll see you next time.